Please be seated. And of course, those in the auditorium are welcome to come to the front seats if you want to. I open this public meeting of the College of Deans of the Vrije Universitiet Amsterdam for a PhD ceremony of the Faculty of Social Sciences and Humanities by affirming that from our Christian origins to the present day, we practice science with a sense of wonder and inspired by fundamental values. Prior to the examination, I invite the candidate to give a brief overview of the research on which the thesis is based. The floor is yours.
Dear Rector, dear audience, my dissertation explores the rise of what I call the Edwardsean theory of the Atonement and the underappreciated role of Jonathan Edwards Jr. in its development. Traditionally, Edwards Jr. is depicted as departing from his father's theology and embracing the moral government theory, often linked to Hugo Grotius. However, I argue this narrative is misleading. Rather than a departure, Edwards Jr. receives, develops, and clarifies his father's theological vision, particularly regarding the doctrine of atonement. Jonathan Edwards is widely regarded as one of the most innovative philosophical minds in America. While much of his system has been examined, debate remains concerning his atonement thinking. Some scholars suggest that Edwards Sr. left room for a governmental theory, yet prior genetic studies have largely overlooked a close reading of transitional thinkers and how they characterized the elder Edwards' system. I contend that Edwards Jr. does not shift to Grotius, but rather refines and systematizes an Edwardsean model rooted in four key influences: Dutch Reformed Orthodoxy, particularly Petrus van Maastricht, his father's manuscript inheritance, engagement with British moral philosophy, and mentorship under Joseph Bellamy and Samuel Hopkins. The Edwardsean theory of the atonement provides a Trinitarian, union-based, and metaphysically rich alternative that defies the conventional categorization within traditional atonement models. To understand ETA's place within theological discourse, we must briefly distinguish its major counterparts. Major atonement models. Penal substitution asserts that Christ bore the punishment due to sinners under God's law. Stephen Holmes highlights that PSA primarily frames sin as law-breaking, with debate centering on the justice of vicarious punishment. Satisfaction theory, particularly as articulated by Anselm, sees Christ's death as restoring God's honor rather than merely upholding legal order. Catherine Sondegar describes this view as necessary and fully compatible with divine grace and sovereignty. Moral government theory emphasizes the public display of justice, where Christ's death upholds moral order rather than substituting punishment for specific sinners. Moral government shifts the atonement from a quantitative punishment to a qualitative punishment, raising concerns about its consistency within Reformed thought. ETA borrows elements from each, but grounds them within a deep metaphysical framework. For the Edwardsians, atonement is not merely a legal transaction, but a reflection of the eternal intra-Trinitarian life. This bold claim shapes the unique contributions of Edwards Jr. The development of ETA. After his parents' death in 1758, Edwards Jr. was mentored by his father's disciples, Joseph Bellamy, Samuel Hopkins. Each disciple emphasized distinct aspects of Edwards Sr.'s theological project, which sought to engage Enlightenment deism by appropriating its philosophical categories. Bellamy encouraged engagement with moral philosophers like Lord Shaftesbury, while Hopkins focused on moral philosophy's implications for sanctification. Edwards Jr. mediated these influences, synthesizing Bellamy's epistemological concerns with Hopkins' moral philosophy, while remaining grounded in his father's theological architecture. Bellamy viewed the history of the work of redemption as a theological roadmap, while Hopkins narrowed Edwards Sr.'s vision into a moral framework emphasizing infinite, disinterested benevolence. Edwards Jr., however, recognized the need to re-examine his father's Trinitarian framework rather than merely adopt Hopkins' orientation. Since he inherited Edwards Sr.'s manuscripts, including Discourse on the Trinity, the unfinished History of the Work of Redemption, and the Miscellanies, Edwards Jr. possessed unparalleled access to his father's theological system His engagement with these writings, alongside with his debates with Universalists John Murray and Charles Chauncey, forced him to refine his atonement thinking. Another key influence was Petrus van Mastricht, whom Edward Sr. had praised as the best divinity writer accepting the Bible. Van Mastricht's theological structure emphasized union with Christ and the mediatorial role of the Son, insights that profoundly shaped Edwards Jr. The distinctiveness of ETA, Edwardsean theory of atonement, is centered on the concept of exchange by union. Following Edward Sr., who maintained consistency between God's eternal intra-Trinitarian life and his external works, ETA integrates the objectives of penal substitution and satisfaction and moral government into a unified metaphysical vision. Like moral government, ETA highlights God's ultimate glorification. Like satisfaction, it affirms the dignity of God's nature as the foundation for atonement. Like penal substitution, it maintains a particularistic redemption of the elect, while the ETA uniquely frames atonement through the lens of union with Christ. The mechanism of atonement, according to the ETA, involves Christ's willingness to exchange his happiness for the misery of the sinners. The exchange is contingent upon the Son freely standing in the room of the sinner's misery. For Edwardsians, this exchange is not merely a legal fiction, but is grounded in divine simplicity and the real ideas inherent in God's nature. This allows the temporal atonement to function as the same, because the temporal exchange depends upon the eternal intra-Trinitarian subsistence to establish a true equivalence. Christ's merit and satisfaction differ relatively, but not essentially. Furthermore, ETA extends Van Mastricht's covenantal framework, in which the Son takes upon himself the middle thing, which is punishment, satisfying both the actual guilt of the sinner and their legal guilt. The Son metaphysically touches the actual guilt of the sinner and the legal guilt on the other, somewhat like a Venn diagram. While this could raise concerns regarding the sameness of punishment, Edwardsians resolve this tension by asserting that divine simplicity allows the atonement to manifest as temporal effects while remaining metaphysically united. Lastly, in keeping with the Edwardsian vocabulary, the redemption of the elect is implied in the glorification of God's nature. They are really one and the same thing. Why has Edwards Jr. been misread? Edwards Jr. has been historically misread due to theological polemics, particularly in the 19th century. Debates between Charles Hodge at Princeton, Edwards A. Mesa Park at Andover. Park emphasized continuity, but primarily in the context of tracing theological lineage towards Andover Seminary, rather than focusing on Edwards Jr. how he received his father's theology. Consequently, the unique role of Edwards Jr. in shaping and transmitting his father's atonement has largely been overlooked. Additionally, Edwards Sr. developed his theology in coordination with Dutch Reformed Orthodoxy. His engagement with Van Mastricht's infralapsarian atonement theory, emphasizing union, provided the foundation for ETA. However, since Edwards Sr. also engaged with British moral philosophers, his students interpreted the system through different lenses. Bellamy emphasized the broader epistemological project, while Hopkins narrowly applied moral philosophy. By analyzing the overlap between these interpretations, Edwards Jr.'s distinct contribution to the Edwardsian tradition becomes clearer. Conclusion: Jonathan Edwards Jr. was not a theological inventor who abandoned his father's thought, but the chief receiver of the Edwardsian legacy. His theory of atonement, a carefully constructed synthesis of theology, philosophy, and Reformed tradition, offers a compelling model that is both historically rooted and theologically fresh. As Edwards A. Mesa Park noted in his introductory essay on the atonement, the transmission of the Edwards Sr.'s theology through his students formed multiple streams. However, Park's missing chain of custody through Edwards Jr. has now found its explanation. Recovering Edwards Jr.'s role reframes not only the atonement debate, but also the broader discussion of faithfully receiving and transmitting a theological inheritance.
Thank you very much. Then I would now like to hear whether you are prepared to defend your thesis.
Rector, on your authority, and as authorized by the College of Deans, in accordance to the decision of the Dean of the Faculty of Religion and Theology, I am prepared to defend my thesis entitled the rise of the Edwardsean theory of the atonement, and the missing account of the younger Edwards's reception to obtain the degree of Doctor of Philosophy.
Thank you. Then the defense will now be opened by our first opponent, and that will be Professor Dr. Oliver Crisp. Professor Crisp is Professor of Analytic Theology at the University of St. Andrews. Welcome, Professor Crisp. Thank you so much for joining us in this ceremony. It's a privilege to have you in our midst, and we look forward to your contribution. The floor, or should I say the screen, is yours.
Thank you, Rector. It's a pleasure to be here. On the authority of the Rector and by virtue of my right, I would like to put the following question to the candidate, which has to do with some of the issues that you've just raised very helpfully, in fact, in your clear and direct presentation, which I did appreciate very much. And my initial question is this: in your thesis, what is the precise mechanism of atonement as far as Jonathan Edwards Jr. is concerned? And how does this mechanism demonstrate that his position is inconsistent with a version of the governmental doctrine?
Thank you, learned opponent. Could you restate the last part of your question?
Yes. So I'm first wondering, what's the mechanism here? How is the atonement brought about according to Edwards Jr. and his New Divinity colleagues? And second, I want to know how their view is inconsistent with the governmental doctrine, since that seems to be a cornerstone of your thesis.
Yes, thank you. The mechanism for the atonement, it rests in the intertrinitarian life and the real idea involved in the atonement, and in the process of the incarnation and acquiring humanity's position, having a capacity granted to him to be able to suffer misery, choosing to voluntarily enter into the place of those who would be miserable, is the mechanism. It is a voluntary response of love, which creates union between the sinner and also the Godhead. And so in the process of voluntarily entering into that position, the mechanism occurs in the exchange of misery for happiness. And it is a transaction that takes place at the moment of his passing and then future resurrection. As it would distinguish itself from moral government, in this sense, the New Divinity attempted to see these elements not in conflict with one another. The nature of God's being, seeking justice for himself and his own glory, and also the redemption of an elect. They looked at these both as not in competition with one another. They saw them as one and the same effect that finds in the Godhead its origin for success. And so in their preaching, they would communicate an availability to respond, and still tried to maintain the mystery of the action of redemption. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's helpful. So in your presentation, you said that the Edwardsean doctrine of the atonement defies categorization. It seems like you had in mind that there are different elements of sort of traditional doctrines of the atonement that kind of get mashed up into a new whole here in some respects, right? You said there's some things that sound like satisfaction. There are some things that might sound like a governmental view. There are some things that might sound like penal substitution. So far, so good? Is that right?
Yes, that is what I was saying. More of a mosaic presentation,
Okay.
attempting to create a uniqueness in its expression.
Okay, good. So that's very helpful. I'm still not entirely clear though what it is that's doing the atoning. And I mean, it's not like the Edwardsians are mechanism mysterians. You know what I mean? They're not sort of saying, well, we don't really know. It's just there's this mosaic of ideas, and somehow the atonement comes about through some action of God that involves these different elements. They do seem to think that there is a specific thing that's going on here that actually brings about reconciliation with God's self, right? Now you're saying
Yes.
it's rooted in the inner divine life.
Yes.
It's grounded in somehow in the doctrine of divine simplicity. But there's some way in which Christ is willing to exchange places with the sinner, right?
Correct.
But it's not mere imputation. It's not merely a legal fiction. There's some kind of sense of organic union.
It is a union that is the effect in the willingness to take upon the role and accept the punishment on behalf of the sinner. In the discourse on the Trinity, Edwards developed the concept of equality of exchange, equality of the essence, and the thing purchased, providing an equality within the transaction. And I would say that that element of anticipation of the economic actions and processions in the incarnation, that Edwards would say that that is can be a backward look into the intertrinitarian life. And the very idea of redemption, the very idea of atonement is effective, and the exchange principle of the taking upon oneself the misery and replacing it with the happiness for the elect is in many ways parallel to the intertrinitarian life. And I think that Edwards and his followers would say that this is the mechanism of exchange in time. The temporal effects occur in time, but there is anticipation and intention. The larger end is in sight. The glorification of the nature of God internally so that others, intelligent beings, could see it. And then at that point, there is satisfaction. There is sustaining his moral character, his moral nature. But then there is also the redemption of a particular bride, the elect. But these are not in competition with one another. They are one and the same thing.
Yeah. Okay. So, as I'm trying to get a better grip on this, would you characterize this view as sort of part of a kind of family of atonement views, kind of that stem from the Reformation, that all in some ways are kind of recalibrations of a broadly satisfaction account, by which I mean this, that there must be some act that's performed by the mediator between God and humanity, by means of which God is satisfied in order that reconciliation can take place. I mean, for Anselm, obviously, it's not punishment; it's this meritorious act that Christ performed. For Calvin and Turretin and people like that, it seems like the satisfaction is a kind of form of punishment that Christ undergoes. You're saying that it's not quite any of those things, but is it the case that this is a sort of doctrine that falls under the broad umbrella of satisfaction, not the narrow umbrella of Anselmian doctrine, but just broadly this notion that God is somehow satisfied by an atoning act? It's just the atoning act itself is kind of multifaceted or something like that.
I would say yes, in principle.
Right.
That there is continuity there with the Reformed tradition. But I think that he was heavily reading von Maastricht.
Right.
And Edwards was, particularly in Sermon 14 on the history of the work of redemption, Edwards lifts large sections from von Maastricht's theoretical, practical theologica. And particularly the chapter on the atonement by the mediator. And there's a sensitivity to the idea of a satisfaction is the same as the punishment. And the merit is also connected. The satisfaction through the punishment, but Edwards in Sermon 14 says that satisfaction and merit are really the same thing. They're they're just qualifications, but they're not essentially different. And his use of the word essential is significant from the standpoint of substance and accents. And so there's a sense in which he recognizes that they have a uniformity, there is a sameness to them, and not just a quantity issue. There is a quality issue that informs the quantity. That they are really not mutually exclusive, but they are the same.
Yeah, okay.
I would suggest, if I interrupt you, to
please.
continue the opposition. My intuition says that there will be a second round, and I'm sure this conversation is not yet over.
Thank you, Rector.
But for time's sake, I would say that we continue the opposition with our next opponent, and that's Dr. James Saladin. He is rector of Emmanuel Anglican Church in New York. So, Dr. Saladin, welcome in our midst, even though from a distance and from a very different time zone. So thank you for your willingness to join the committee and to be present online here. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Rector. It's wonderful to be here. Good afternoon to you all, and good morning from where I am. Mr. Banks, good afternoon to you, and it's a privilege to be here. On authority of the Rector and by virtue of my right, I would like to ask some questions, Mr. Banks. I note that, and what I'd love to do is talk a little bit about the Trinity and how the Trinity relates to atonement. And I'm going to go to page 272. You state this. Quote, the tendency of the Son towards mediation ad intra flows out like the rays of the sun, S-U-N. The Son's mediation in redemption ad extra is but an expression of his nature ad intra. Wonderful imagery there of the rays of the sun and the connection to the second person of the Trinity. My question is this. Please explain the difference and similarities between the Son's mediation ad intra and the Son's mediation ad extra. I read your dissertation to you speak of mediations in both frames. So please to explain the similarities and differences between the Son's mediation ad intra and ad extra, and then how this relates to atonement, please.
Thank you, learned opponent, for your question. You ask about similarities and differences. And in particular, there's a lot of similarity, and yet there's differences only maybe in capacity. There is a difference in terms of the infinite, and also there is also in the sense when Christ entered into the world through the incarnation, there is a difference of capacity there of limited in his humanity. However, in the divine ordering, there is a generation of the Son, which is mutually beneficial to the whole. The generation of the Son is, in effect, the process by which spiration occurs between the Father and the Son, and then also the Son with the Spirit also with the Son, there is an element in which there is a natural inclination within the Trinity for mediation. There's an essential quality of perfection that is necessary. And Edwards was very keen on the concept of perfection and proximity. And using those philosophical character categories, Edwards, in Discourse on the Trinity, was keen to note that there was a mediation that occurs by virtue of essence. And yet there is also a reality to the modes that take place. It's not merely rational, but it is also real. And the Son's existence within the intra-Trinitarian life takes on a quality of mediation so that the happiness and harmony of the whole is established. And again, this is pure act. This is something that exists in fullness. And so as we look at it, we're trying to assess it. And one of the best ways to assess that is in the nature of the atonement. By the mediation of the Son, out of service to the Father, and also in service to the elect, misery is adopted. There's mediation, and happiness is provided, a gift of the Holy Spirit. And so in the process of ad intra, there is a capacity that is seen. And then in the ad extra expression, the atonement serves as a vehicle for viewing the intertrinitarian life. So there is two purposes to this atonement. It is not merely, it is not only, I should say, the redemption of the elect, but it is also a vehicle for understanding the intertrinitarian life, so that other intelligent beings in the world, angels, demons, can assess and appreciate the intertrinitarian life of God. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so I wonder if you could just play out well, let me go to another place on page 299. So I'm curious still a little bit about the distinction still between the ad intra dynamic of mediation and the ad extra dynamic of mediation. And I hear you mentioned the difference of capacity. I might want to ask you to drill down a little bit and help me understand what you mean by that and how it differentiates. And then I can come back with another question. But can you unpack that just a little bit? How is you mentioned capacity being a point of differentiation, and I'd like to know more about that.
Yeah, capacity is a frame of reference related to time-bound elements.
Okay.
So there is a limit to the effect of the atonement in the sense that it is limited to the elect. There is a capacity that is reducted. It is not a universal for the entire world in a universalist type of perspective. And that's what I was referring to in terms of its capacity. There is a aspect of for a very specific elect that's involved in view.
Would it be something like in the ad intra that there's an infinite, there's an infinity there of mutual love and
correct. Yes. Yes, but there's a specific particular application in the atonement that is not dismissed. Because there is, in divine simplicity, there is an eternal relation. In time, there is very specific time-bound effects, temporal effects of that prior relationship from eternity.
Okay, thank you. If I can shift just a little bit, on page 299, you say, this reflective nature emanates and reminates as a mechanism of just exchange through payment of the Son and the purchase of the Holy Spirit. This is a mediatorial work ad intra. And so my question is, the use of the term payment. So if the sun is a payment, I'm curious how the sun is a payment. If I'm reading you correctly, how is the sun a payment ad intra?
Yes, that is analogized
Okay.
as a way of reflecting back into the intra-Trinitarian life.
Mhm.
And so in Discourse on the Trinity, Edwards was keen that in his shorter document, he anticipates developing that more of how that the economic effects, the temporal effects in time, could be a way to understand. And that's where he introduced the concept of payment for the thing purchased, being Christ, the thing purchased.
Mhm.
And it is right to read that in an economic understanding. But also in that paragraph and following, in Discourse on the Trinity, he shortens down his work and says that there is a need for more development and how the gospel doctrines themselves may open up opportunity to explore the intertrinitarian life. I'm paraphrasing to some degree.
Sure.
It's not a direct quotation. But he does anticipate. So I believe that as I have looked at other parts of his writing and as I move forward in understanding how his son developed the concepts of general justice and distributive justice, and those elements that he developed were rooted back on the nature of exchange, preserving the equality within the Godhead. There is a natural ordering in the real mode of relations that preserves equality, yet distinction between each person of the Godhead. And by analogy, you can see a mediation, purchase element of relation between the Father through the Son and the Spirit.
Mhm. Mhm.
I hope
Yeah,
that is
thank
more
you.
clear.
I can well see the way in which the economic dynamic in the atonement echoes the
Hmm.
ad intra dynamics.
Yes.
And I'm surprised to use the term payment with respect to the ad intra dynamic. That seems to me to be an ad extra category. Rector, may I ask briefly about how we're doing on time? Do I continue with more questions, or shall I
Well, I
wait?
should prefer to continue and leave the question for the next round so that the
Okay.
others will have enough time as well. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
We will continue the opposition. Now with Professor Dr. Jonathan Marco online. Professor Marco is Associate Vice President for Academics, Dean of Cornerstone Theological Seminary, and Dean of the School of Ministry, Media and Arts at Cornerstone University, Grand Rapids, Michigan, and also Professor of Philosophical and Systematic Theology. Welcome, Professor Marco, in this meeting. We are much obliged that you are here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, dear Rector, and it is good to see you, dear candidate Banks. Greetings from Grand Rapids, Michigan. Dear candidate, I would like to direct your attention. I want to discuss John Locke and the Trinity. There's, in essence, in ideas. I think that most of my questions will be focused around those key concepts that you bring up time and again in your dissertation. So first, I would like you to look at page 55 and 56. There's a nice little paragraph there that just got me very excited and interested, and I just wanted to hear a bit more. The bottom of page 55, beginning with the last paragraph, beginning with the term or with the word secondly, Edwards Jr., represented his father's theology using Locke's term essential with reference to glory rather than the word internal. And then on the next page, 56, you say, in Locke's definition, one can hear elements. I think definition of real essence, I believe you mean. In Locke's definition, one can hear elements of the Athanasian and Nicene creeds. Can you expand upon that? I'm very interested. John Locke was very slippery when it came to the doctrine of the Trinity. So I'm just kind of exploring a little bit more and what your thoughts are there and what Trinitarian connections you see with Locke. I wanted to hear more, and you kind of left me hanging.
Thank you, learned opponent, for that question and seeking clarity. As it relates to the definition, it's in the prior sentence in which it says that is a real essence is constantly found to coexist with a nominal essence. That particular constitution, which everything has within itself, without any relation to anything without it. And so, if I understand Locke correctly, what he's referring there to is that the essence, every being has an essence to which it adheres. And but there are also there are essences. There's an essence, but there's also a nominal descriptive of that essence. And the descriptive, when it fully aligns with the essence, it is the real thing. It is the real idea.
Like a triangle.
Perhaps
Yeah,
so.
a triangle, the nominal essence would be the same as the real essence. Because
Correct.
you have a, yes, go
very
ahead, sorry.
clear definition. It has a clear definition.
Mm-hmm.
And in this way, I believe, in some ways, that to coexist, that picked up in my reading of Locke, and also considering the topic of Edwards on the Trinity, how that only the Son and the Holy Spirit may claim this aspect of explaining the Father, because they have the real essence, and they coexist, and they are very God of very God, and there is no distinction. However, as we as finite creatures interact with the Son through the incarnation, we are getting to know the real essence through the name and also the person and the signs held forth of the eternal being and nature of the triune God. He is best to explain it to us. And so I see there is a nominal aspect to the incarnation, and yet there is also in eternity the real essence there. This is not to deny any of the church councils at all, but there is clear union between the humanity and the deity, but there is something limited on our part as observers and seeing the signs held forth. I hope that clarifies a little bit where I was coming from.
Yeah, I guess were you perhaps suggesting that the way that we perceive the Holy Spirit and the Son would be similar to, we don't really know of what they're constituted, so we would refer to them as nominal essences.
Yes.
And then that God, though they still are underlined with this thing we know not what, the actual
Correct.
real essence.
Correct.
Okay.
And the alignment of the two, there is a nominal expression of the real essence, but when they come together as one, they are the real essence.
Okay.
And the words, it's almost speech act theory in play.
All right.
The word
Right.
goes forth as a symbol, but when that word is completely aligned with the original, it is the same thing. It is a one-to-one, the sameness.
Right. Understood. Thank you for that clarification. Continuing on in a similar vein, you use the term nominal ideas and real ideas, and then you also use real essence and nominal essence. Can you share with me your intent by using those terms, nominal ideas and real ideas, and speak to the relationship that may or may not have to real essences and nominal essences?
Thank you again. This is obviously something can get very confusing. There is a realness to the essence, and that also pertains to ideas. In divine simplicity, it is the fullness of the idea. But then there is projections that are of a nominal nature, and projections that enter into time. Those elements in time are nominal in the sense that they express the idea that is resident in the fullness of divine simplicity. And yet they're not indistinct. They're still, they're expressions of the real. I hope that clarifies some. So the ideas resident in the Trinity, the idea of even the ideation of the Son is also, there's a realness there, but when the incarnation comes into play, there is a nominal effect that's seen in the world. That is an expression of the real idea of the Son from eternity.
Okay. So is the use of nominal idea, nominal essence, and real essence, is that part of your so-called Lockean grammar?
I would say that, yes, I believe that he's borrowing these concepts from the Lockean tradition.
Okay.
Obviously, there are a couple of pieces between Locke and Edwards, the moral philosophers in Britain and Scotland. And so he's processing this vocabulary also in conversation with them from that tradition.
Okay.
Of the idealism that's steeped in that tradition.
Okay. And idealism, you just mean the focus on ideas, correct? Or do you mean something broader?
Well, even in the end for which God created the earth, the world, the concept of idea is discussed, and the idea being generated and knowledge, and that being the Son himself.
Okay.
And so within the Trinity from in eternity and divine simplicity, there's a real essence to that idea. There's a real idea. It's not just a figment, but then there is a projection of that idea into time, and the incarnation is the fullness of that idea. Yet it has a nominal effect within the world that we live. And so I think that he was expressing using idea, but also giving it a definition of a person. Edwards, that is, using Locke's thoughts on ideas and how they're perceived as well.
Well, thank you very much. I realize that I'm not visible at the screen, so I cannot subtly hint to finish the question. But my idea is that we should continue with the next opponent. As a member of the doctoral committee, Dr. Lisanne Dandria Winslow has turned in the question. She is not here due to personal circumstances, but in absentia, she will take place in the questions. She's from Fairfield University from Connecticut. The questions will be posed by Professor Dion Forster, here present. And I'll take the opportunity to introduce him as well, because he will also pose his own questions. Professor Dion Forster is Associate Professor of Public Theology in the School of Religion and Theology of the Faculty of Social Sciences and Humanities here at the Vrije Universiteit, and Extraordinary Professor of Systematic Theology and Ethics in the Faculty of Theology at Stellenbosch University. Professor Forster, thank you for your willingness to step in these two modes.
Yeah.
So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rector. Mr. Banks, thank you for an excellent piece of work, and we withhold congratulations. There still is some discussion and deliberation that lies ahead, but it was a joy to read your manuscript. And so on behalf of Professor Andrea Winslow and myself, and on the authority of the Rector and by virtue of my right, I'd like to begin by posing a few of her questions to you, if we can begin with those. So she's asked if we could please turn to chapter 2, page 65. And the question relates to the third paragraph on page 65. She writes, in this section, a connection is being teased out regarding how Edwards considers the ad extra divine action constituting creation, redemption, and atonement as relational conduits, revealing something of the ad intra Trinitarian relation. Now, I think you can see in the line of questions that have come from many, this is a point of interest. Her first question is, could you please expound on your thoughts regarding in what manner you think Edwards saw the futurition of God's pure act, not only relating to his own nature, I take it she means God's own nature, but also the dense web of real ideas of future acts to create and redeem the world. Was this merely an eschatological aim, is the question.
A learned opponent in respect to Winslow. I understand, I think, the question. In terms of eschatology, I do believe that this was there's two parts to creation and redemption. There is an eschatological end for which God creates the world, which is to glorify himself. But there's also a secondary end, which is to redeem a particular people. These are not at odds or with one another in the Edwardsean atonement thinking. But there is also a secondary purpose, and that is to explain the nature of the divine to other intelligent beings. And in divine simplicity, the idea to create is simple, but there's many components to it that get teased out over time. Well, the 6 days of creation and the progress of history. All of those are, I call it a dense web in the eternal knowledge of God. But there's a lot of wisdom there, and there's a lot of to be understood by other created beings. So the angelic world looks upon creation and sees types, symbols, and makes deductions from them about God's nature, which can't be seen otherwise. And so there is a sense of intentionality to the futurition. These ideas are dense. The word futurition means ideas that do not occur yet in time. They're static in the sense they're within the mind of God. And then in creation, they are lined out one after another through time. And then they come into being. And in the coming into being through time, there's a chance to understand the internal workings of the divine nature. And the voluntary nature of God in mutual delight. He is excited and happiness overflows. And that beatific delight is what excited the creation of the world. And to share it with other intelligent beings, the angelic world, finite creatures such as you and I. And this is to also be enjoyed eschatologically in eternity after time has finished.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to, Professor DeAndrea Winslow poses a very interesting follow-up question to this, and I'd like us just to dwell on that for a moment, if we may. She says at the end of the paragraph, you also describe how these ideas in God's mind are expressed as shadows to reveal God's nature in the world. And I think that's a very rich image that you draw upon there. And she quotes, unveiled distributively through past, present, and future acts in creation, redemption, and atonement. Now, what she focuses on in this part of the question specifically is this section of creation, redemption, and atonement. And she asks this question: can you frame this position in terms of contemporary theology that might correlate with what is a current concern in ecological theologies in relation to the earth, and how the contemporary Christian church is thinking about this throughout the world? Her question is, how might you see Edward's vision of divine action, revelation in creation, redemption, and atonement coming to fruition in our contemporary age? So if I understand the question correctly, it's trying to retain that temporal element, but thinking of it in contemporary terms.
Sure. Edwards himself had great delight in the spider. He had great delight in the created world. He has a volume, there's a published volume on types and images. And as you flip through there, he has looked at many different objects in the world and shown how that they point to elements of God's nature. And caring for the world, as people care for the world, and in farming and in harvesting of animals, and there's a chance to observe some of the creative capacity of God's own nature, even in the things that he delights to give people to eat. There is something there to be observed in the happiness that we enjoy in many delightful foods. That is almost in itself an expression of God's happifying nature. That's a word that Edwards used. He liked to happify. And so that the enjoyment that we experience as human beings is in itself an opportunity to learn more about God's nature that is not yet revealed.
Because you finish this question because
Yes.
Professor Forster has also his own questions.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. By the way, I think we could do with a lot more joy in some of our contemporary theologies of creation. But thank
Yes.
you for that answer. I found it enlightening. Now, in chapter 1, section 5 of your dissertation, and this is my own line of questioning, I'd like to talk a little bit about the method and scope that you used in your study. To my mind, you provide a clear and well-motivated description of your methodological approach, and this combines comparative and evaluative methods to explore reception history of Jonathan Edwards Sr.'s atonement theology. And, you know, this choice is both, to my mind, appropriate and effective in shaping the study in the manner in which you have done. However, the study does tend to exhibit something of an apologetic tone. And I can understand that, sometimes appearing somewhat defensive of Edward Jr.'s legacy. Now, the question that I would like to pose, Mr. Banks, is might a more open or balanced evaluation rather than a primary defensive stance not have lent a greater neutrality and persuasive power to the study's findings? So if you could maybe account a little bit for your methodological choice and your framing in the study, and how you hope that would stand up to critics.
Fine question, learned opponent. Some of the preparation for this dissertation occurred prior in a master's thesis. I wrote a thesis on Edwards Jr. and his father's pneumatology because there was perceived variance there. And so my motive to discover the potential of misrepresentation arose out of that context. I can see how that having a preconceived opinion may color the water. However, it wasn't without some prior leg to stand on. There's a rational foundation. There was issues in the received understanding of Edwards Jr.'s pneumatology.
Yeah.
And so that opened a door for exploration. Is there also a similar kind of issue here as well?
Yeah.
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 And I understand the critic component, but in terms of projecting my methodology, I was advised to take a comparative between father and son.
Sure.
And then evaluate how did the thinkers between father and son, was there deviation? Were there things that colored the son's thinking? And so I tried to be as open as I could to other potential influences that may have colored the thinking.
Yeah.
But it seemed as I was working through it that he could also critique his own father. So there was some of, in particular with the concept of imputation, I don't think his father had fully developed that thought yet. And Edwards Jr. thinking through von Mostrit's position on union and relational imputation, he believed that was more in line with the biblical account.
Yeah.
So as an example, he pushed his own father. So I tried to examine the whole as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. And I must say it is for me certainly convincing in that way, but it's good to hear you speak about that. I'd like to turn to that latter point that you just mentioned now, particularly the influence of Petrus van Maastricht. And just to say, by the way, I think it was a great choice to do this study with your supervisors here at the Free University, because there is a particular kind of expertise, I think, that comes from this location. And yeah, just to say, Mr. Banks, I thought that your thesis really for me was a representation of a kind of historical theological research that also had a critical responsibility to both the past and present scholarly conversations. And in this sense, it really presented for me something of a convincing narrative. However, you do tend to place a significant emphasis on the influence of Petrus van Maastricht for reasons that you've already hinted at. Now, while van Maastricht's work provides valuable insights into Edward Sr.'s and Jr.'s theological frameworks, this prioritization might overshadow other key influences, such as the broader Puritan theological tradition and Reformed orthodoxy. And again, you can hear me arguing for a kind of balanced engagement with some other sources. How might these enhance the comprehensiveness of a study such as yours and its analysis to situate Edwards Jr.'s work more fully within a broader theological context?
Yes, thank you for that question. I think I understand where you're coming from. Unfortunately, given the necessity to narrow the scope of my research, I had to make some limitations. However, I think there could be a very good follow-up to evaluate to evaluate the Puritan influence and also the Puritans, particularly the Arminian perspective potential, just to evaluate to see whether it would be anything similar or contrastive. I think that might be useful. Now that my defense has ended, I sincerely thank the opponents for the attention they've devoted to my thesis. I now look forward to the decision of the doctorate committee, which will decide whether the degree of Doctor of Philosophy will be granted to me.
I hereby adjourn the public meeting of the College of Deans for further deliberation. Please be seated. I reopen the public meeting. By its duly accorded authority, the Doctorates Committee grants the degree of Doctor of Philosophy to John Sherwin Banks. I invite the supervisor to place his signature to the degree certificate as witness of this deed. The supervisors are Professor Wim van Vlastuin. He is Professor of Spirituality and Theology of the Reformed Protestantism and Dean of the Restored Reformed Seminary in the School of Religion and Theology at the Vrije Universitiet. The second supervisor, absent due to personal circumstances, is Professor Michael Hakin. He is Professor of Church History and Biblical Spirituality and Director of the Andrew Fuller Center for Baptist Studies at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, Louisville, Kentucky. I declare in public that in the privacy of the closed meeting, the candidates by a signature stated adherence to the conditions laid down in the provisions in Article 5 of the Doctorate Regulations of the University regarding rights and responsibilities in society and science. I now invite colleague Professor van Vlastuin to continue the ceremony. And during the pronouncement of the investiture formula, only the Doctorate Committee stands.
By the virtue of the authority vested in me by the management regulations of the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam, and as supervisor appointed thereto by the College of Deans, I hereby confer on you, John Sherwin Banks, the degree of Doctor of Philosophy, together with all rights, privileges, and responsibilities thereto appertaining. In witness thereof, the seal of the university and signatures of the rector and the supervisors have been affixed to the diploma you are about to receive.
Thank you. And Professor van Vlastuin will also continue with the laudatio.
Dr. Banks, dear John, it's a great honor for me to be the first to congratulate you on the completion of your doctoral degree. It has been a relatively short time since we first came into contact with each other. After you graduated from Southern Baptist Theological Seminary with a thesis on the relationship between the Second Great Awakening and Jonathan Edwards Jr., you were intrigued by the way in which Edwards Jr. received and retrieved his father's doctrine of atonement. So you reached out to the VU in 2020 to start your PhD program. During your research and as a part of your training at the graduate school, you participated in a Zoom masterclass to discuss my book, Be Renewed. I remember your participation with great respect. And a highlight for me was your visit to our PhD days in Elspeth. I picked up you from Schiphol Airport. We had dinner together there, and I learned a lot about your personal life. In your youth, you enjoyed fishing for trout and Atlantic salmon, wilderness excursions, playing the violin, watching hockey, and reading. Your parents were in the ministry in Nova Scotia in Canada. Later, you could not resist the call to the ministry. You went to Bob Jones University in South Carolina, where you met the great love of your life, Abby. After your marriage, you both went to Ontario to assist your father in church planting. During those early years of marriage, you attained the Master of Divinity, and you were blessed with 4 boys, Adam, Noah, Jonah, and Seth, all names that refer to Christ. Later, you adopted a lovely little baby girl, Anna, who has blessed your home richly, you say. At Schiphol, you told me about homeschooling and the relevance of a Christian worldview. The Lord's way led you to Abby's hometown in Pennsylvania, where you have been for the past 14 years. It struck me that you began as a Jeremiah with tears, but over the years you have had the joy of shepherding your church like Nehemiah, as it has become healthy and is growing numerically. One of the things that surprised you at the dinner at Schiphol was the fact that Dutch theologians could be Orthodox, both Orthodox and evangelical. You told me that you would share that with your congregation. So I'm still curious to hear about your congregation and their reaction to that news. Meanwhile, your research continued. Despite the COVID-19 pandemic, you started your research energetically. Although traveling was challenging, your search for original handwritten documents was successful. The highlight of your research turned out to be when you found a letter written by Joseph Bellamy explaining how Edward's system of theology in true virtue was to be understood. This insight unlocked much of the structure through which Edward's understanding of atonement took shape. At this point, you began to understand how Edwards constructed his theology in dialogue with moral, philosophical thinkers in the United Kingdom. Furthermore, this study has increased your appreciation for Orthodox Reformed theology. Petrus van Maastricht played a significant role in shaping both Edward's senior and junior's theological developments. You struggled to be concise. Your original draft of the chapter on Edward Senior's atonement thinking was approximately 53,000 words, but you were able to reduce it to about 70,000 words. Your research has contributed substantially to a deeper understanding of how Edward Jr. developed his father's doctrine of atonement. Your research also helps scholars of Edwards to gain a richer understanding of the structures underlying Edward's doctrine of atonement. Moreover, you demonstrate that theology requires retrieval. I pray that your work will be a blessing not only for yourself, your family and your congregation, but also to God's kingdom worldwide. As I learned from our personal conversation at Schiphol Airport, you have a heart for God's kingdom, and you hope that this doctorate will serve the building up of God's church. That is the real use of theology, understanding faith more deeply, fides quaerens intellectum. And I can say from the closed meeting in which we evaluated your defense and your thesis, that all people said you should continue to study and to do research on Edwards. And we are looking forward to the coming results of that. I congratulate you and I wish you all blessings together with Abby. Have a good day here and tomorrow when you travel to Austria and come back to the Netherlands and then depart for America again. Thank you.
To the congratulations of the supervisor, I gladly add the congratulations of the College of Deans of this university. For you and your wife, Abby, not only your wife, but also filmmaker, I think. And all your loved ones, those joined in this ceremony, both here and online, and those who will watch the video on a later occasion. I hope you look back on an inspiring and memorable ceremony. I also want to thank the committee members, both here present and online, for their participation. Thank you so much for everything. This PhD ceremony is now completed. Doctor of Philosophy Banks will now lead the procession out of this hall, and I invite you to follow. You will have the opportunity to congratulate Dr. Banks just outside the aula on the right side. I ask you all to stand. I close this public meeting of the College of Deans by desiring that our scientific search for truth and wisdom may be beneficial to the world and to humanity.